We've assembled a panel of people that represent a widespread of viewpoints from our state. The panel brings perspectives from the ranching community, the Colorado Water Conservation Board, a major water provider here in the Grand Valley, and a city utility, the city of Grand Junction. But first, to my immediate right is Carlisle Courier, a rancher from the Molina area. Does everyone know where Molina is? Does anyone not? Great. On the north flank of the Grand Mesa. Carlisle brings a perspective rooted in the cattle business, but forward-looking to water supply planning through his positions on the Interbasin Compact Committee and the Colorado Basin Roundtable. And Carlisle is also the state vice president of the Colorado Farm Bureau. To Carlisle's right, your left, Taryn Hutchins-Cabibi works in the critical areas of drought planning and climate change for the Colorado Water Conservation Board. This summer, Taryn has been heavily involved in water supply and drought impact assessments. And to Taryn's right is Dick Proctor, manager of the Grand Valley Water Users Association and the operation of the Government-Highline Canal here in the Grand Valley. Every Wednesday, Dick joins other reservoir operators and water users in a conference call that guides administration of the Colorado River. And finally, to the right of Dick is Greg Trainor, the utility director for the city of Grand Junction. He will bring perspective of a municipal water provider in this interesting water year, as well as his experience in water supply planning on the job and through his participation on the Colorado Basin Roundtable. And do any of our panelists specifically wish to start the conversation? Carlisle? Greg? Either one of you? Go ahead.
Go ahead, Carlisle.
Okay, thank you. It's a pleasure to be here. I was thinking when Nolan was giving his talk, I really appreciated the graph to the variability from average of all those different years. I remember when John Block was U.S. Secretary of Agriculture, he made the statement that he'd been farming for 40 years and he'd seen one normal year. I'm still waiting for that normal year. I don't think I've seen it yet. Every year brings its own challenges and every year is different. This year has been certainly a very interesting year for Colorado agriculture, and in my specific area on the north slope of the Grand Mesa, Pottle Creek drainage. To begin with, it looked like it would probably be a fairly decent year. We had a very wet year in 2011. We went into the fall with our reservoirs more than half full. We have Vega Reservoir that we get supplemental water from through the Bureau, or our private reservoirs, and the Cottonwood and Big Creek drainages were all over half full when the year started. We had good soil moisture because we had a lot of moisture last year, and going into the fall it was there. So it looked like, you know, we could get by with a year that had below normal snowpack and still be in good shape. Even by the 1st of March, when our snowpack was quite low, but still in our area it was better than 2002. It was a whole lot better than 1977. We thought, you know, we aren't going to probably have a real good year, but we'll get by. There'll be enough water. After the 1st of March, things went downhill in a hurry. We not only quit getting any moisture, during May and June I had a total at my ranch headquarters of 0.11 of an inch of precipitation those 2 months. But the temperatures were much above normal, as Nolan mentioned, statewide. Particularly the high temperatures. Low temperatures at night were still cold. We had into June, a lot of nights we'd have freezing temperatures that would keep anything from growing, but then it'd get very warm during the daytime. The other thing we got that he didn't mention was a lot of wind. We don't normally have wind in our area, and I sit in meetings with some of my farm and ranch friends from the eastern slope, and we get to discussing wind energy and policies to promote putting up wind towers. My comment is always, I'm glad I don't live in a place where that's an option. We don't have wind, but this year we did. It was windy every day. The snowpack that we had basically disappeared with very little runoff. It went from from about, I think we were about 50% of normal snowpack the 1st of March, and that snowpack basically evaporated, went off into the air with very little runoff down the streams. We're dependent on water from two sources on my ranch. We have a lot of high water rights that come out of various creeks tributary to Plateau Creek, and those usually provide water for me through the first half of the summer. And then the second half of the summer, we use reservoir storage. This year, there was very little runoff, and so those high water rights did not last, and we had to start using the reservoirs almost immediately. And talking to other farmers around the state, you hear the same stories. Particularly in the northwest part of the state, most farms and ranches raised less than 50% of their normal hay crop that we produce to feed our cows through the winter. My particular case, I normally put up about 2,000 tons of hay through the summer. This year I'm going to put up, I'm not quite done yet, but probably around 750 tons, so well less than 50% of normal. And to maintain my cow herd, I'm going to have to buy a lot of hay, and it's very expensive. Some of the places that hay's coming from here are rather unique. There's quite a bit of hay right now actually coming into Colorado from Canada. Apparently they have quite a bit of grass hay in Canada, and to think you can haul hay that far and make it pay to compete with what prices are in the areas is a little bit unbelievable for me with the price diesel fuel is and cost of trucking, but that's where it's coming from. Last Monday I was on part of a water tour with the IBCC and the Ag Water Alliance. We were at JBS Feedlot in Greeley, or their Kersey. They're buying all their hay out of Canada. I was advertising for hay on a website, and I actually had a guy from North Carolina call me and offer to sell me hay shipping from North Carolina. And I may end up buying some of it. It's hard to believe you can get it that far away, but I can get it cheaper than I can buy it locally. I am buying a lot of hay locally too, where the going price for good alfalfa hay right here in the Grand Junction area now is about $275 to $300 a ton. And that is hard to justify feeding the cows, but some people are selling their cattle. I don't want to do that. That's my factory. If I sell my cows, I won't have anything to produce next year. So I want to hold on to those cows, but it's going to involve a purchase of a lot of expensive feed. The one thing that did help us in our area, we did get a lot of rain in July. We were in one of those lucky areas that did it. It looked very bad on the top of Grand Mesa before that. I run my cows in the summer on national forest land on the east end of Grand Mesa. We were really concerned whether we might have to come off early off those forest grounds. The rains in July saved us from that. The grass really came on and looks good this fall. Another big concern we have is what happens next year. Even if we have normal precipitation, I know in 1977 we faced somewhat similar circumstances as this year as far as the crop ground in my area. There were fields that we were not able to irrigate, and those fields, a lot of the grass died out. So in the next year in 78, even though we had adequate water, we had poor crops because of a lot of the grass dying, and I fear we will face that next year, that we can't expect a lot of those pastures particularly, and grasses like orchard grass and timothy grass to come back in 1 year. Alfalfa and crops like that they don't die from drought stress, but a lot of grasses do. Even those that raise crops, some of them have faced challenges around the state. I was talking to a farmer friend day before yesterday. I probably shouldn't mention his name, but most of you know him as the chair of the House Agriculture Committee, Jerry Sonnenberg, and he told me he thought he was real smart this spring with looking at the predictions of how much corn was going to be produced, and so he went and contracted what he expected to raise out of his cornfields this summer for $6.50 a bushel. Well, the problem is when the drought hit Sterling area, he didn't raise enough corn to meet those contracts. Now he's going to have to go out and buy corn at $8 or $9 a bushel to deliver on contracts for $6.50 a bushel. And a lot of farmers are facing those types of situations. It's makes it tough for those of us in agriculture who are dependent on the weather for the production needs that we have in agriculture. I think the biggest take-home message and the lesson I can give out of looking at this year and past years is the very importance of storage. That's the only thing that saved us this year. We had good water storage in reservoirs like Vega Reservoir in my case, and the Cottonwood and Big Creek reservoirs that provided us enough water to help us get by this year. If we hadn't had that storage, and we won't have that storage next year because those lakes are all going to be empty this fall, that would really put us in a lot tougher position than if we hadn't had that storage. And we need to have the storage to be able to keep water on wet years so that it is available to us on these drier type years. And I guess I will stop with that, Steve, and go to the next person.
Thanks, Carlisle.
Do these and we'll end with the state?
Whatever you wish.
Go for it.
Okay, thank you. Well, my name's Greg Trainor. I'm the Utility Director for the City of Grand Junction. And I appreciate the thoughts of Carlisle here, and it reminds me, and it's something that we could have a tendency to forget, that at least in the Grand Valley, agriculture is part of our economic base. And it may not be as glamorous as some of the other things that are going on here in the Grand Valley and the Western Slope, but certainly agriculture is something that's extremely important. And even to the city of Grand Junction, it's important and something that we should take note of. As Nolan was talking, I realized that one of the things that was important for a municipal provider is to understand the difference between a drought plan and a water conservation plan. As I was thinking about this, I made a number of notes. As Nolan indicated, drought is fickle. It can be site-specific. It can be relegated to an entire region, or it can be subjugated to a basin or a sub-basin. Sometimes it covers the entire state. Sometimes it doesn't. In 2002, the City of Grand Junction, the Ute Water District, and Clifton, and the other municipal providers were criticized because we didn't have mandatory restrictions. But within our watersheds on Grand Mesa in 2002, Canna Creek and North Fork of Canna Creek, we had sufficient water, and there wasn't a need for us to, in that sense, to jump in there and have mandatory restrictions, even though we felt that voluntary restrictions were important. For a utility, a drought plan is something that has to be flexible and adaptable, a flexible and adaptable effort to deal with an immediate problem. A conservation plan is an attempt or an effort to establish a mode of operation that becomes a basic part of your utility operation and is embedded into the minds of the customers. That water is important, it needs to be conserved, it's a value that we need to set aside. I think in the water industry, at least what we're shooting for, or what I am anyway, is to try to have the success in affecting people's thinking similar to what the recycling industry has done. In our particular household, we wouldn't think of throwing away aluminum cans or steel cans in the trash can. That has got to go into our recycling bin, and it's become compulsive in our household, and I think and I hope it's become compulsive in other households. That you don't walk out of your kitchen or your living room and throw the metal cans away. You recycle them, and I'm hoping that that through our conservation plans we will be able to affect people's thinking with regard along those similar lines. When I was the town manager in Rangeley during the drought of 1977, our drought plan was to dam the White River at our pump intakes. That was a pretty simple drought plan. Part of that drought plan was for the city manager, myself, and the police chief on Saturday evenings to go door to door and shut people's water off. That was the second part of our drought plan. And the data that I collected in order to make these determinations was turning on the faucet in my kitchen, and if air came out, I knew the town was in trouble. Climbed the water tanks and then went out and implemented the second part of our drought plan, and that was to shut people's water off. We didn't have meters, and people would leave northwest Colorado and go to Grand Junction, many other places, leave their water running. So that was my first lesson in water conservation. And for the town of Rangeley, our conservation plan became a little more complicated than our drought plan was. And eventually, through loans from the Farmers Home Administration, got the entire community on water meters, constructed additional storage, treated water storage, and then an infiltration gallery on the White River that allowed us to pick up better quality water than we were previously. So that might give you an idea a little bit of what the difference between a drought plan and a conservation plan in my mind, and it's something that I have to keep reminding myself. The City of Grand Junction has a regional drought plan that is in cooperation with the Ute Water Conservancy District and the Clifton Water District. So I think we've got one of the critical aspects of a drought plan in that it's a regional and collaborative effort. Part of our drought plan is that a shortage for one of us is considered a shortage for all of us. Now, our water supplies come off the west end of Grand Mesa, the north side of Grand Mesa, and the Colorado River, depending upon which district or utility it is. And there may be circumstances where the City of Grand Junction may not be in a tight a position maybe as the Ute Water District is. But our primary mantra, so to speak, is that a shortage for one is a shortage for all of us. And we have interconnections between the three utilities that allow us to have redundancy and reliability of water service so that we can take water off of various places on the Grand Mesa and the Colorado and Gunnison River and provide drinking water to our community. As Carlisle was talking, it occurred to me that an acre-foot of water for drinking water purposes is certainly different than an acre-foot of water for agriculture. So I don't think we find ourselves in as dire position as an individual rancher because our acre foot may stretch a little bit further than yours. Our drought plan includes also a common agreement among the municipal providers that based on various triggers that we see in terms of water storage in our reservoirs, that we would approach mandatory restrictions on drinking water, whether it's within the City of Grand Junction or the Ute District or the Clifton District, mainly because of the necessity of all the water users acting together in concert for a community of people, even though their water is provided by three separate individual municipalities or drinking water providers. We do have a regional conservation plan as well that we've drawn up among the three major water providers, and this conservation plan includes most of the stuff that you would read about and hear about in a conservation plan. Toilet retrofits, water audits for our largest consumers, leak detection, obviously. We are in the middle of over the last 27 years, we've had an ongoing pipe replacement program within our communities to reduce the lost and unaccounted for water. And as part of our conservation plan, we're participating with Nolan Doskin and Coco Ross to ensure that the schools in the Grand Valley have rain gauges, and that they not only have them, but they've got them connected, set up, and that they're actually using them. So I guess I would just close on that note. We do access the Colorado Water Conservation Board website. We do look at their drought planning toolbox. We are starting a kind of a revision or an effort to jazz up our drought plan a little bit based upon the tools that the Conservation Board has provided us. And I think we're definitely making some steps there. In order to change people's thinking about water conservation versus an immediate problem of drought, this is a long-term proposition. This is something that just doesn't happen in one spring or one summer. It's something that happens over a period of years and even generations in order to change people's thinking about the resource that they're consuming. And lastly, I think it's extremely important that the water providers, at least in our area, and I would say the rest of the state as well, that drought and conservation planning needs to be a regional collaborative effort among all the water providers and their customers. It has to be something that you're working together on, and in our case, that would include the irrigators and the irrigation districts that provide water to the irrigators as well. So, thank you very much.
Thanks, Greg. Dick, following up the thoughts from a domestic water provider, do you want to share your thoughts from the agricultural water provider point of view?
Sure. Can you hear me? We started our irrigation flows in April last spring, and it turned out to be kind of a crazy water year, but we've persevered and made it through. We got the water in the canal, and everybody went to their head gates and they wanted water themselves. And so the demand being high, we had to what we call prorate the water deliveries. And we have a mechanism of if you have 40 acres of ground that's water righted, we deliver 1 cubic foot of water to that 40 acres. Under a proration plan, we cut that to say 80% of their water right for that 40 acres. And I think he even got down to 70% at one time of a delivery of water righted acres to the 40 acres. We've been in that position all summer. We're still in that position today, trying to make sure we have enough water for everybody. And they've gotten used to it. They've worked with us and cooperated with us. I've had my ditch riders, if they saw some extra water coming up, or I saw some coming back up on my daily water record sheets, we'd go out and offer that farmer or water user a little more water if they could use it for the day. Or if we got short of water, we'd go out and say, hey, we need to take some of that water back that we gave you yesterday or something. And so we've worked through that, and we're getting here close to the end of the season, and no doubts that we will make it through the rest of the season. One of the challenges I've had during the summer is that with the low water flows in the river, if there's any bounce in the river, we feel it all the way from Glenwood Canyon down to our diversion structure. And so we've had to watch that to make sure that the gates are set right to let the right amount of water come through the dam into the canal. And there's various reasons why we watched that so closely, but it's for safety and control of the structures. So we've been able to keep up with that, even though it's been challenges. The gentleman that was here this morning before lunch that talked about fires, I had somewhat of an experience about fires last summer, that just north of our diversion dam on the Colorado River in Tibet Canyon, that Piney Ridge fire occurred last summer. And I was up there and watched the flames up on the mountain top above, or the ridge above our diversion dam, and watched that fire burn for a couple hours. I mean, it burned for more than that, but I stayed there for a couple hours and watched it. Then a couple of weeks later, there was a big heavy rain up there, and I saw the trash washing down the river and of the contaminated water with pine needles and little twigs and smell of rubber or oils from the road as some of that rain had washed the dirt or something off the interstate, and that got into the river and it came into our canal, and you could smell that stuff in the water. So we've had a good year, but we've had to persevere and do things to make sure that everything was all in order, and we feel comfortable that we'll make it through the end of the season. What about next year with reservoirs so low? Time will tell. We'll just keep up and keep doing our job, and we'll make it through.
Thanks, Dick. Taryn, give us the CWCB perspective, please.
Certainly. So the CWCB manages the state drought mitigation and response plan that is part of the greater all hazards plan that the Division of Emergency Management manages. And from that, we have actually been activated since May of 2011. Activation occurs by a memo from the governor when conditions deteriorate such that it warrants a response. And while 2011 on the west slope was a wet year, the southeast and southeast and south central portions of the state were extremely dry. The Arkansas River Basin is facing its second year of D4 conditions, which means exceptional drought conditions. 2011 alone in the Arkansas Basin, they saw $105 million in agricultural losses, representing over 1,000 jobs. As Carlisle mentioned, commodity prices are at an all-time high, so ranchers and farmers are struggling to keep their cattle alive. We've seen great sell-offs in cattle herds over the last 2 years. And as a result, we have activated the state drought plan, but also activated some of our impact task forces, namely the Agricultural Impact Task Force. It was initially activated in May of 2011 just for the southeast and south central portions of the state. It was then activated for the Colorado River Basin, the Yampa, and the White in the early spring, and is now activated for the entire state, and then has been elevated from a phase 2 to a phase 3 activation. So that kind of gives you a picture of where we've come over the last 18 months as we've gone from bad to increasingly worse within the agricultural sector. On the municipal side, we have tried to provide as much support as we can to the municipal sector. We've seen drought restrictions across both the Front Range and the West Slope, some mandatory and some voluntary. I know many municipalities feel the same as Greg mentioned. They're worried about next year. What are we going to do if we don't refill those reservoirs? There are communities that have drought management plans on completed for their utilities. There are not a lot. The CWCB revamped our tools and resources, and Greg made my day when he said he actually used them. We have a whole host of tools and resources on our website for local planning. We also have money. But we then created a new guidance document and a sample plan for how you can do drought management. And one of the things that we've shifted in how we as a state deal with drought management and drought preparedness, as well as how we recommend local communities deal with it, is to take a much more holistic approach. In Colorado, our two biggest economic drivers are agriculture and then tourism and recreation. Both of these sectors are heavily, heavily impacted by drought. This year we saw the winter ski season impacted by lack of snowpack. We saw the summer recreation season impacted by decreased stream flows. And it has forced a lot of creativity and flexibility among these sectors. And so we are continually working to assess the vulnerability that lies through not only agriculture, tourism, and recreation, but also the municipal sector, the social impacts of drought, the energy impacts of drought. As it was mentioned during the keynote address at lunch, energy and water are inextricably connected, and there are certainly impacts that come during drought for the energy sector. So we have taken a first initial step at doing a vulnerability assessment. By doing a vulnerability assessment, we can look at where we can best target our limited funds in decreasing impacts for future droughts. So when we revamped our drought plan in 2010, we had this brilliant idea. We had this great new vulnerability assessment. We had all these new protocols in place, and we had this brilliant idea that we were going to do a test, a tabletop exercise to test how the drought plan worked. Well, our drought plan was approved by FEMA in January of 2011, and by May we had already activated the state drought plan. So I guess there is no way to test things no better way to test things than actually putting them into place. And so far, so good. We are up to renew our drought plan in 2013, so we'll be working on that in the next 12 months. And we have really tried to focus our drought planning efforts at how can we best prepare for drought and then safeguard our economic drivers in the state. As part of that, we are holding a statewide drought conference next week in Denver that is focusing on building a drought resilient economy through innovation. It is unique in that we really are focusing on all different sectors. In the past, our drought workshops, our drought conferences have focused on one or two individual sectors. They've been municipal or they've been agricultural. And this really does take a cross-section of all of Colorado, looking at the agriculture, the municipal, the tourism and rec, the energy sectors, trying to look at how we can collaboratively come together to better improve our drought preparedness efforts so that when we have the next 2012, because we will have another drought year at some point, hopefully not next year, but at some point we will have another drought year, how can we decrease those impacts and make it hurt less for the communities and the people here in Colorado? And so that's really what the state does from our perspective. We view ourselves as providing technical resources and assistance to local communities, and we are really here to help improve drought planning for all of you and to provide the resources so that you all can lessen the impacts that affect your day-to-day life.
Thank you, Taryn. Appreciate it. We do have time left for questions. So I'm certain that there must be questions from the audience. And while you're thinking of that, I'll throw out a question to the panel. Nolan Doskin's prediction for precipitation this upcoming winter season was kind of lukewarm, I'd say at best. We're in a much more vulnerable situation this fall than we were a year ago. And now we know we're in somewhat of a drought trend. What have you discussed with your partners, with your stakeholders, with your water users, or your family perhaps, in the event the 2012-2013 snow year is another below average snow year?
I might answer, and I'll speak for the city, the Ute District, and the Clifton District. We recognize that based upon predictions or projections of where our reservoirs are going to be the first part of November, that we need to be thinking about talking about to our customers what a stage 2 drought is, what causes a stage 2 drought declaration, what are the factors, and then what our community might expect if we have mandatory watering restrictions, and if our rates are affected in order to ensure that the mandatory reductions take place. So we meet each month, we talk about this. Right now our reservoirs are in good shape, but They may change by the 1st of November. In order to cover our bet for the winter and the spring of 2013, we may be looking at preparing our customers for a stage 2 drought with mandatory restrictions. But we think it's really important that the next few months be dedicated to explaining what that is, what might lead to that, and then what the community can do to affect that outcome.
Thanks, Greg. Dick?
My board hasn't discussed it fully at all, but I could say that it will depend on what state water law tells us, maybe, in that the prior apportionment on the water rights will dictate to where who will run and have water and who might not have water. Grand Valley Water Users Association is over 107 years old. It's been operating around over 100 years. But we have a junior water right as compared to some of the other water rights on the Colorado River here in the Grand Valley. And so that those entities would have first shot at it before Grand Valley water users would have it. And so water rights will dictate a lot of an answer to that question.
Carlisle, how about from the private ranching perspective?
Well, there are a lot of concerns of what the future holds if these trends do continue, not just here in Colorado, but nationwide. This drought is so widespread. If we have another year like this year, this next year, there is no question a lot of the cow herd in Colorado will have to be liquidated. We've already been told by the Forest Service, for example, that if we don't have a normal winter this winter, to expect reduced grazing available on Forest Service land, which we're fully dependent on here. Our cow herd nationwide is already at the lowest level in 50 years. There was huge liquidation out of Texas the last 2 years because of drought. And I think the big concern for our industry is at what level do we get to that beef prices become so high because of shortages that people quit eating it and we permanently lose demand. That's an issue that we've been kicking around and talking about. If beef prices get considerably higher than they are now, what happens? Do people quit eating beef? And if they quit eating beef, how long does it take for them to come back to beef when prices do eventually come down, or is that loss permanent? And it's a big concern for my industry.
Taryn?
I think from the state's perspective, we've done a couple of different things to increase our ability to provide assistance over the long term. For quite some time, we've had a flood response fund, but we've never had a drought response fund. And so last legislative session, we actually modified that fund so that it's a flood and drought response fund. And so we have funds available through that. For the first time in over a decade, we've activated our agricultural emergency loan program. So we have, I believe, 3 loans that have already gone through the application process with that. We do have grant money available for municipal drought plans. And we continue to refine and improve our response strategies through the Agricultural Impact Task Force, the Drought Task Force. We work very closely with the executive directors of the Department of Natural Resources, Department of Local Affairs, and Department of Agriculture to make sure that we are trying to cover all our bases as we can. I think the longer the drought proceeds, the harder it becomes and the more innovative we have to be. But I think that we've taken some significant strides to at least be better off than we were 2 years ago.
Thanks. Other questions for the panel? Yes.
I had a question for Dick. Carlisle mentioned that his production was down over 50%. Do you have a feel for your water users' decrease in production with the drought?
I don't think there has been a decrease yet in their crops because of the drought. The question was, have we seen a drop in production because of the drought? I don't believe so. I don't believe there's been a drop in production at this point, and that might show up a little bit later. But I've got some farmers that are getting 4 and 5 cuttings of hay off of a field this season, and a little bit more, probably an additional crop of hay that they haven't gotten in the past. But I think there could be some losses in the hard corn crop when it's picked, because a lot of that corn, particularly around the edges, you could see it was stressed on the ears on the outside of the fields. So there might be some losses, but it's not going to be significant.
For Carlisle, can you just give an estimate as to the decline in cow herd, say percentage-wise, since September 2011?
I don't know those numbers right off the top of my head. There was a lot of times your liquidation occurs late in the summer because you have a cow herd, you let them have their calves in the spring when most operations calve in the spring, and then they liquidate the cows as they come off pasture starting about now. And we're starting to see a lot of increase in the number of cows going to market now. I think it was around 4 million head of cattle that were decreased in the Texas cow herd last year, which was probably close to 20% of their cow herd numbers in Texas that were liquidated because of the drought, and we could very well see similar decreases here, I think.
Yeah, I think the manager of the Loma sale barn commented that they were seeing calf numbers come through the sale barn in August that were as great as what they usually see in November. Not a good sign. Rachel?
Thank you. Thank you all for your comments. Well, we're all very hopeful this is a one-year at best event for at least a while. I'm wondering, at what point does concern for drought planning and conservation turn into more concern about overall climate and climate variability, perhaps caused by man-made causes? And when and if does that enter into a municipal response or an agricultural response or a statewide response to our impact on climate?
I'll start with that. I think two things. One, I think we have to be really careful about attributing this year's drought to climate change. As Nolan showed earlier, Colorado has a very variable weather patterns. Having an extreme wet year and an extreme dry year, while unique, is not unheard of. So I think we need to be really careful about attributing it to climate change. Having said that, I think it's also really challenging to have a conversation about climate change without drought entering into the picture. And from the state's perspective, we have really increased our climate change studies and activities over the last 4 years. There I go. We spearheaded the Colorado River Water Availability Study, which was a very comprehensive, very expensive study looking at how much water would be available from the Colorado River system in the future given current demands. We are moving into subsequent phases of that study. We, for the first time, incorporated climate change into our drought plan, looking at drought spell statistics. We have done multiple reports on what the vulnerability would look like with under climate change conditions, and we've looked at what climate change means for some of the municipal sectors. And some of those studies, such as the Joint Front Range Vulnerability Study, have been a collaborative effort with a number of municipalities throughout the state. So I think we are starting to incorporate it to the extent that we can. I know the cone of uncertainty was mentioned this morning, and it's really difficult to plan for multiple plausible futures. And so I think we're really trying to grapple with how do we do that. And we're at the early stages, but we're certainly farther ahead than we were a handful of years ago. And it's something that we're taking seriously at both the state and I think many municipal levels too.
Anybody else on that question?
Well, I think it's important to read the literature and to make sure that as a utility manager like myself and my staff and the other organizations that we work with, that we're looking at the data and studying the data from experts that know more than we do, and I think reaching the conclusion that that warming, that climate change, drought, etc., is something that's real. It's variable. Certainly, sometimes you have an effect and sometimes you don't. But coming to the realization that this data is out there, that it is variable, and that we really have to be thinking about the worst case or the most plausible scenario that may result, and we have a responsibility, I think, to think globally as far as the big picture, but then to act locally to the benefit of our customers and our communities.
Thanks, Greg. Good questions and good information from all the panelists. Thank you so much for being here today. This was a good afternoon panel, a very necessary topic to discuss. Thanks for your contribution.